Ay, 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 ay. Ay, ay, ay. Hi, everyone. Melon Crush Monday here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it is time for a review of the new Offset record, Father of Four. This is the debut full-length solo album of Cardi B's Bae, one-third of the Atlanta rap trio Migos. Father of Four, Offset. Over the past year or so, the Atlanta trio has been cashing out on their popularity by doing some extracurricular records with collaborative projects like Travis Scott's and Quavo's Huncho Jack Jack Huncho. Also, the surprisingly decent Without Warning with 21 Savage and Offset himself. A very dark and gritty collection of low-key trap bangers, all produced by Metro Boomin. Last year, Takeoff himself dropped his own incredibly rushed solo album that not many people took to. I can barely even remember it at this point. Then came Quavo's Quavo Huncho, which was star-studded and pretty well produced, but Quavo himself demanded the least attention across the entire LP. His lyrics, his bars were pretty forgettable, and he took a bunch of weird risks on tracks and sounds that didn't really complement his style. And now we have Father of Four, which miraculously is the best of the trio's solo efforts. At least in this first round of them anyway, because maybe there'll be more in the future. And Father of Four isn't the best of the Migos solo records so far just by virtue of not being total trash. It's actually a pretty mellow, somewhat consistent, and personal album. A record that kind of allows you to view Offset outside of the context of Migos entirely. I'm actually pretty surprised how listenable this album came out, especially given public perception of Migos in the past as far as who the best member of the group was. Going back to 2016 when I asked thousands of my Twitter followers who the Beyoncé of Migos was, far and away the choice was Quavo. And it's kind of easy to see why that may be the choice for many. On a good Migos single, Quavo's voice usually stands out the most, has the most character. He's just got this really distinct, kind of nasally, kind of raspy voice that fits in a range that just pops in the mix. And to be honest, Offset's voice is usually what sticks out the least in a Migos song, especially since Takeoff's vocals are usually the deepest, raspiest, and heaviest. Given all of this, it's kind of weird to realize that it's Offset who all this time had the most solo potential. All of these comparisons are relative though, because is having the most solo potential within Migos translate to having enough solo potential to sustain a long-term solo career? Most likely no. But I guess this record does serve as final confirmation that Migos truly are bigger than the sum of their parts. Because listening to even the best of the solo albums so far, it still kind of feels like you're listening to Migos in a diminished capacity. Still, it does seem like Offset put the most heart and forethought and effort into this record, going into his relationship with Cardi, his personal connections or lack thereof with his own kids, dropping an occasional bar about racial injustice or societal ills, his family, his past, his upbringing. There are tracks on this thing like the intro featuring Big Rube, definitely getting some big Outkast vibes off of this one, where Offset seems to be bearing his soul a little bit, honestly. He's also rapping in a somewhat different delivery than we are used to. Sure, at the very start of his performance on the song, he does sound a little like Travis Scott, but when he does gain his bearings, his voice doesn't have the usual put-on that you hear when he appears on a Migos track. It just sounds like he's not trying to be anything other than himself. The moments on this record where Offset tries to go deeper and more substantive, they are admirable. Not just the opening track, but also the closing track, the song How Did I Get Here featuring J. Cole, also the track Lick, where Offset says, "Think about my history, back of the bus, fought for the rights, but we still killed us." For Offset, it's a pretty nice change of pace, definitely highlights on this record, but in the grander scheme of things, do these tracks blow me away? Not necessarily. A lot of the societal observations Offset makes on tracks like these, they're kind of surface, very general. It's not like he's really turning a new leaf or anything. And it doesn't take long on this record for Offset to start dropping tracks that essentially just sound like Migos songs, but with just him and maybe with a bit more reverb and instrumentals that take on a more mystical angle. Tats on My Face, Made Men. Tracks that, again, sound like a typical Migos song, but with the dramatic atmosphere of A$AP Ferg's Trap Lord. I don't think the record picks up again until the song North Star, where CeeLo Green's guest vocals really steal the show. They are one of the most gorgeous highlights on the entire record. The production on this track is actually pretty stunning too. They both do a great job of enhancing the drama of Offset's very lonely and paranoid bars, which, given the pretty underwhelming delivery he has throughout most of this record, they they are in need of enhancing. There are some spots like After Dark where Offset's voice gets a bit bolder and more authoritative. His opening verse on this cut is relatively poetic, like he almost knows he's saying something of a bit more substance here, something that he might have really worked on. That's definitely a highlight, and we have another track that has been very talked about from this record, Don't Lose Me, which is essentially Offset's public apology to Cardi about not being a good husband, being unfaithful, and honestly, it's no 444. The lyrics of the track feel more general than confessional, but it does sound like the instrumental samples a cricket, and that's kind of weird, but okay. There are also a lot of big features on the back end of this record that I hoped would pick up the momentum of the album, but many of them don't. Legacy with Travis Scott and 21 Savage should have been amazing, really should have been a blockbuster of a track, but is more of a dud. Mostly because it doesn't really seem like there's much rhyme or reason as to how the song features its guests. Sure, the instrumental is kind of pretty, but Offset and Travis constantly trading places and bars in the first leg of the song really does no justice for either of them. It's kind of like they just cancel each other out. Meanwhile, 21 Savage appears with no real intro, no real build-up or anything like that, and he disappears just as quickly as he came. I feel like everybody was doing their best on this track, but the way all the vocals and performances were organized and presented, it just feels like a traffic jam. Almost like that Kodak Black song, ZZ, but worse. The Quavo and Gucci appearances on this thing are nothing to write home about, even if some of Gucci's ad-libs in the background are pretty animated. Cardi B easily walks away with the best rapped feature on this entire record. Sorry, J. Cole. She brings the most energy, the most hilarious bars, and arguably does a better job focusing on the topic of the song than Offset does. Chasing after clout. And unfortunately, Offset doesn't really have anything all that poignant or memorable to say on the topic. The song Red Room, one of the lead singles to this record, is a perfect example of Offset's shortcomings as a solo artist. Because even though he's putting a lot of his own personal story into this record, and he tries to run this track as if it's like an emotional diatribe or a monologue, it's still kind of underwhelming. Not really that strong of a hook or a tune to it, and Offset's delivery from front to back is bland and unmemorable. Doesn't really leave much of an impression at all, and the track just completely ends out of nowhere, and somehow goes on way too long. I do think the track Came a Long Way does end things off on a somewhat high note, but the ride up until this point does make it kind of hard to celebrate. I don't know, man. I'm a little torn on this one. It's certainly a listenable album. It is pleasant, has a handful of highlights, only a few tracks that I thought were supremely lackluster. While there are some characteristics that I find very underwhelming, the production is pretty great. Offset does pull together a handful of very good songs, and given the previous two Migos solo albums, it definitely surpassed my expectations. I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Offset, father of four, forever.